Hello, I'm DB Velocity, and here I discuss synthesizers, sound design techniques, or even music production with a focus on all hardware gear. I hope you consider subscribing, and I'll continue bringing the content as I really do love exploring all things synth gear related. For this series, I've decided to go ahead and revisit the MPC One in a small set of videos that will break apart some aspects of working in the standalone environment. So I'm beginning with a focus on keygroups, as I feel it's a feature worth exploring more, even while many users will usually have a good grasp of what it's all about. I just wanted to do a little more diving into the options with this track type to cover what some of the limitations are when using the auto sample, and later on I'll show some ways that we can really make the keygroups in general come alive. So the first thing that I've done is I've set up the TTSH, which is a DIY clone of the ARP 2600, as my source for sampling to cover a basic scenario when using the auto sample function, which is a great convenient way to build a multi-sample key group from scratch. Before I begin, I'll note that if you're using a modular or semi-modular synth under control of the CV track type, that you may have noticed the overall range of output is configured for C1 at 0 volts to C6 at 5 volts, as the CV and gate outs are 0 to 5 volts only and follow the obvious volt per octave standard. Knowing my note range in this track type helps me to decide how to best set the parameters for the given auto sample key group creation. So let's dive in, as now it's time to explore. Just jumping in on this empty project where I currently have a CV track on track 1, I just need to make sure that my outputs are set for the proper channels. Now I can go into the sampling page and turn on monitoring for my input, but more importantly, I also want to make sure that my gain is adjusted for the proper level of capture. Now, perhaps you already have a sound ready to go, but what I'm going to personally do is I'll just exit out, go to the grid, and I'm going to draw in a note on the sequencer, and I'm just going to make this a nice long sustained note so that I can essentially just hit play and let this loop while I patch around. And I'm not really looking for any particular sound as much as I'm just going to throw things at random until, when you get to a sound and you've paused and come to a nice landing spot where it catches your ear, and that's where I'm basically going to stop, as that's usually as good a starting point as any. Okay, I have this sound that I'm liking, so let's use the auto sample function and build a quick multi-sample set that will be generated into a key group program. And I do that by heading into the sample page and pressing this little keyboard icon at the top. At the top here, we can just basically see that the source for triggering our sounds is track 1 in the CV program. And we can see that the input that's being recorded is input 1 and 2. Now, I'll quickly note that this could be set to a resample of the MPC outputs. That might be useful for, say, capturing a plugin program and creating a key group out of that if, for example, you wanted to utilize different modeled filters. So there's plenty of possibilities there. And you can also set that to be a mono input if that makes sense for you. Now we have the note range, and with our CV track type, I know that I can set the low note to be as low as C1, and I can go as high as C6, but I'll leave it on C4 for this example. And then we have the note stride. Now, it defaults to 6 notes, which is basically fine for most synth sounds, and all that really means is it's going to take each sample and pitch it upwards of those 6 notes before triggering the next sample. Like I say, this is basically fine for most synth sounds, but sometimes you might want a note stride of 2 or 3 depending on what the sound is, and even down to 1 for every single note. Then for the extend min max toggle, this just means that if checked for this example, when I play a note below the C1, that the C1 sample will pitch downward and can begin to sound less realistic, and any note above the C4 note range will play back the C4 sample and track the pitch upward with that effect. So if toggled off, then you're limiting to the note range selected for playability. So this is just for a personal choice of whatever the context is that you're capturing. Next, we have the velocity layers. And this is really only useful if your patch has a different timbral response where that is concerned. So for mitigear, you would typically have a velocity control set to the filter cutoff. Now we have our sampling times. So we can see here our note length is defaulted to 3000 milliseconds. That's 3 seconds. And that's going to work just fine. Obviously, I can go a lot longer, but 3 seconds will be plenty good for what I'm doing here. And then for the tail, I'm going to go ahead and leave that alone as well. It's set for 1000 milliseconds, so that's just a 1 second tail of, release stage, essentially. It's not going to necessarily play a role in this scenario that I'm doing, and I'll explain in just a minute. Because now we're getting to the base name. So I'll just start with something like the source of our sound, so T, T, S, H, and then I'll give some kind of description like if it's a bass, or maybe I'll throw in a mood or something. So let's just say bass vibes. All right, hit do it. Now, moving on, we have the looping section, and you can see we have looping enabled for forwards. So what this does in regards to the tail setting, if you have looping enabled on, the tail is not going to actually take effect, because what's going to happen is if I have, say, my amp envelope actually opened up, all that's really happening is it's going to be playing the looped section of our sample, and it will never actually play the tail. The tail is only there in the event that I decide to turn off the looping and treat the samples as one-shot behavior. But let's go ahead and change the loop start point to be 1 second. So pump that number up to 1000. And then for the loop end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it the full length of the note, right? Because if I have 3 seconds of capture, I'm going to want that loop back to occur at the end of my sample and not, anywhere prior. Otherwise, it's just a waste of sample, right? So I'll set that to match. Now for the crossfade, this is basically just if I'm trying to play my notes out longer than the 3 seconds that I've captured. So if I want longer sustains, the crossfade is going to be very handy in disguising that looping that's going to take place. Because this deals in a resolution of samples and not like milliseconds or anything, I'm going to go ahead and pump in a nice hot number here of 10,000. Okay, I usually find that this is a good starting point because, this isn't even a full quarter of a second, if I remember correctly. So, this is very dependent on like having enough space of samples between the sample start, the loop start, and the loop end. It will automatically max out if your loop start and start point is shorter than the amount that you set. So you can just go ahead and crank in some high number if you want, but I find that's a good starting point usually. And I'll leave that on equal power. I have linear as an option, but equal power tends to work fine for me. So auto trim start. This one is usually best left alone because all it's going to do is it's a non-destructive move of the sample start playhead. And you can move it back if you wanted to, but it's just going to automatically move that play start head to where wave input begins. Then we have an option to make this the current program upon completion. So I'll go ahead and check that for this one. And the very last bit just tells us the duration of how long it will take to capture all these samples. And that's calculated on, the note stride, the layers for velocity, the duration of notes, all those things kind of get calculated into it. So right now it's just going to take us 24 seconds and, that should be fine. So let's go ahead and hit do it and I'll skip forward. Now we have our first key group, and so the first step is to go into the program edit page. And clearly we can get to playing our new sound, but we will benefit greatly by fine-tuning a few parameters. So we should go ahead into the sample tab here on page 1, and you might notice that it shows looping is on, but if you've played a sound at this point, it's going to loop the entire sample from start point to end point. Now, we had set a loop point for the samples, but it's not in effect right now, right? So the very first thing we want to do is we're going to select the settings found under the gear icon up here. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm just going to turn off the loop lock, right? Because that is locking the loop start to the sample start. So we'll turn that off, and then I'm going to go ahead and also turn on the zero snap, which is just snapping all of our points of the sample to the zero crossing of our waveform. And that helps to eliminate little clicks and pops, right? Let's close that. And now right away we can see our loop point has appeared. You know, this is a good place where you might want to start auditioning and listening to your sounds, right? Now, playing that note, we can hear sort of this distinct looping that's still occurring, right? Now, a lot of that may be due to sort of like the phasing of our waveform, some kind of modulation to the timbre that's occurring, right? All those things kind of play a role. So what we can do is we can adjust our points, obviously, for one thing. But another thing, we might want to go ahead and change the crossfade settings. To do that, we have to actually go into the sample edit page. Now, on the sample edit page, it will just pick up where you left off. And what I can do is I can hit pad 16 and listen to the sample play from loop start to end point, and it will just continuously loop. So I'll do that. Now I'll go ahead and hit crossfade, and I can play with this value now. So let's go ahead and make it even higher, right? Now you hear that? It's still kind of there, but it's smoothed out. So it just sounds sort of like in and out. It has a little bit more flow to it, right? So, and linear, that's kind of a nice effect. You know, maybe I want it on linear. But I think equal power is fine here. So I can go ahead and start to dial this in for every sample here in the sample edit. And so I just scroll to the sample, I hit pad 16, I make the changes I need to make, right? And once I'm all done with that, I'll go back to the program edit. Now from here, you might notice like, okay, I made all those edits, I got everything nicely tuned in for my looping, and it sounds smooth. The crossfade is great. And for some reason, now it's not playing in the program. What's going on? Well, we have to actually load all these new sample saved states into the program. So the quick and easy thing to do, we have 7 key groups total, so I only have to do this 7 times. But for each sample, I just select that key group, I select the sample that's being triggered, and then I just scroll off and then back on. And I don't know if you noticed that, but my settings have changed, right? So I can do that for each key group, and I can go and do that on the second page of the samples tab under program edit as well. I can select key group 2, select sample, just scroll off and then back on. And now it will play all of the edits that I made in the sample edit page as far as the crossfade settings go and stuff. So let's say we've done all that and we're getting our instrument to sound nice, and you know, we can drone things out nice and long and it sounds pretty decent, right? So if you've gotten this far, the next thing that you might want to do or consider is whether you want to have a little bit of a release stage to the amp envelope. I personally like to put a little bit of release on my tones here. So I'll select all key groups so that it's affecting all 7 samples, and I'll just open up that window real quick so that you can see, but I find usually around 80 is a good starting point for most sounds, and it will sound kind of a nice natural little release stage, right? Simple. So with all of my edits with regards to the looping and crossfading and stuff all completed, this is a good point to stop before I go any further and save all of my progress, because this is really a great starting point for going in all the many directions that any given project may take me. So I'll go ahead and hit that pencil icon, choose your location, and let's move on. Back in the program edit, let's go ahead and hit all key groups, make sure that's selected, because anytime you play any of the different zones, it will select that zone. So before you make edits, always be sure to check that you're editing all of them, unless you want that specific zone to do something a little different, which is totally fine. But more often than not, you want all of them to be affected. And so we select all, and now we can start playing with, the different model filters. Let's close that filter up somewhere around there. And go ahead and add some resonance, and just play around, right? Find the settings that you like. So I'm just gonna dial in some things real quick, just kind of get flowing here a little bit. I might take a little less resonance there. And, obviously just start having fun with it. You have all these like synthesizer type settings that you can put into play here. Yeah, we have some modulation sources, so we can have filter tracking of the keyboard pitch, we can have the velocity, change the attack amount, or the envelope amount in general, or the filter amount. But my favorite thing to do is on the next tab, here under LFO modulation. Now, it's pretty basic because you only get the one LFO, and then you have the various 4 destinations here. We can change the rate, we can change the shape, and then we can change the amount to those destinations. Aside from all of that, my favorite thing is that guy right down there in the bottom corner. Now what this is the aftertouch to the filter, because we have these MPC pads that have great aftertouch response. If your sensitivity is dialed in just right, I find that usually around 65 to 70, I might have to play with things a little bit, but check this out. We have aftertouch. Pretty cool, right? Now, it's not a polyphonic aftertouch, it is only channel, but it's still cool that we have it, because these pads are quite responsive. And like I said, you just might have to play around, find the right amount that works for you. It's not always going to be used, but it's fun. And this is just one of those things that can take that key group and push it into the next level of expression and make it come alive. And so, yeah, that's just a great thing that, with the aftertouch, obviously you should be taking advantage of that, in some form or another. And this is the perfect place to do it. So we have all these synthesizer type settings, and we can play with it and make it, further tailored for any given project, especially with assigning effects to individual key groups or to all of them. I'm pretty sure that's how it works, right? I select that one and I give it that, select another key group. Oh yeah, see? So I can have different delays in different zones and things like that. There's just so much going on here, right? So I'll leave you with that, and I'll continue the next episode with putting layers into the key groups and maybe some other clever setups that take advantage of all the options of this track type. But now you should have a good idea of making key groups from CV tracks or MIDI tracks or whatever, and turning them into expressive and playable instruments that go beyond the basic capture. I hope you found this useful. And maybe you learned something extra today, so I'd encourage you to give me that thumbs up if you did, and hopefully I'll see you for the next one. Have fun, explore, and take care.